I'll do anything for a good life. David wore a smile as if basking in self-satisfaction. At first meeting, he seemed like a charming young man, but now, he just looks like a superficial, petty villain. I'm set for life with a reverse dowry. Proudly lifting his chin, David flicked a business card held between his index and middle finger towards me. Every move he made seemed so pretentious it was nauseating. Has the person I once considered marrying always been this unpleasant? I reluctantly accepted the business card. Which real estate? Oh, that place. David, having married into the family, had changed his surname. The name was familiar to me. Of course, the company name written next to his name as well. Unfortunately, it looks like we'll be seeing each other monthly. Ah, what a shame. I was hoping I'd never have to see you again. Now it was my turn to hand out a business card. Seeing it, David's face turned as white as a sheet. I am now 45 years old. My name is Jessica Owen. The events I am about to describe began about 3 years ago. At the time, I was briefly engaged in matchmaking. Having lived a life dedicated to my career and remained single, I started it out of curiosity, encouraged by those around me. Whether I would get married or not was beside the point. Meeting new people was refreshing and fun. One of these new acquaintances was a handsome young man who liked older women. David Thompson. David was a refreshing man with his hair dyed chestnut brown, slim, and suited very well in a suit. He was 9 years my junior but carried himself with a sophistication and smoothness that seemed beyond his years. I'm good at cooking and housework. I prefer supporting someone who is striving hard rather than advancing my own career. David, saying this, seemed very gentle and kind. A stark contrast to the workaholics I was used to being around. Talking to you feels soothing. When I said this, David smiled happily, crinkling his eyes. At times like these, he looked his age, but usually, he had the calm demeanor and stability of someone my age. Talking with the attentive David was enjoyable, and before I knew it, I was looking forward to our meetings. Unbeknownst to me, I was being drawn to David, a mistake I was yet to realize. The first sign of discomfort was his insistence on being treated during dates. It was less about him wanting to be treated and more about him signaling he had no intention to pay. Thank you for the meal. After finishing our meal and conversation at the restaurant we went to for our date, David stood up with the brightest of smiles and started walking away, completely ignoring the bill. It caught me off guard at first. He was almost 10 years my junior, and I earned more, so I didn't mind treating him. But I wished he would at least pretend to reach for his wallet. Wondering if it was wrong to expect that. It's not that I don't want to pay. It's just your attitude of taking it for granted that bothers me. Couldn't you at least pretend to feel bad about it? The situation left me feeling uneasy, and I sought opinions from those around me. Receiving mixed responses. Some said the one earning more should just pay and be happy about it, while others believed it's customary for the man to treat. Someone even said to me, "Going Dutch feels much clearer, doesn't it?" One opinion that struck me the most was that I should directly ask the person I might marry in the future. Indeed, if we were considering becoming a family, it wouldn't be good to keep these feelings bottled up. I decided to confront him directly. You know, I've been the one paying most of the time, right? From now on, I'd like us to go Dutch or take turns paying. What do you think? David seemed momentarily taken aback. He cleared his throat and appeared to ponder for a few seconds, as if choosing his words carefully. Then, he sincerely apologized before explaining. Among men, it's customary to treat someone older or in a higher position as a sign of respect. So I misunderstood. Even with women, and especially with someone senior like you. Jessica, I thought it was only polite to simply say, thank you for the meal. And bow my head to make you feel appreciated. I'm not used to this whole matchmaking thing. I guess I could have offered to pay. I'll make sure to do so from now on. Indeed, among the older men I know, it's quite common to treat others, almost as a matter of pride. I was satisfied with his explanation, and we agreed to take turns paying from then on. However, a sense of unfairness continued. When it was my turn to pay, we would go to nice restaurants, movies, and museums. But when it was David's turn, we'd end up at cheaper places. Like cafes for meals and parks for outings. It might just be a difference in preferences, but it left me feeling a bit uneasy. However, before I could even start to complain, David said, I'm sorry I can't take you to nicer places when it's my turn to pay. My income is limited, so this is the best I can do, you see. He showed me his bank book with a disheartened look. Understanding his situation, I felt completely fine with it and forgave David. After all, I wanted to choose a partner based on compatibility, not their financial situation. So his considerate behavior actually made me think highly of him. Compatibility is what matters most. I decided to commit to David. 2 months had passed since we started dating. Meeting David on the weekends had become a part of my routine. That day, I was out on a date with David again. I arrived at our meeting spot nearly 10 minutes early. From a distance, I could see the bench where we agreed to meet and smiled. David had arrived early too, which made me happy thinking he was looking forward to it as well. Excited, I decided to surprise him by sneaking up behind him. As I approached, David's phone rang. I paused, not wanting to interrupt, and overheard David answering the call in a relaxed tone. Hey. No way. Today's my day with the old lady.
Yeah.
Let's catch up another time. I unintentionally eavesdropped. It seemed David was turning down an invitation from a friend. He quickly ended the call and yawned, appearing sleepy. The phrase, day with the old lady, bothered me immensely. I couldn't help but suspect he was referring to our meeting day. I discreetly left the spot and calmed myself with a cold coffee. While pondering whether to confront him, I returned to the meeting place 5 minutes past our scheduled time. I apologized for being late, and David smiled kindly. No, I've just arrived too. You're busy with work, aren't you? As always, he's the picture of a refreshing, good-looking guy. He smiled sadly after mentioning work, looking as if he desperately wanted to see me. It made me wonder if the earlier incident was just a misunderstanding. With a tentative smile, I decided to proceed with our date as usual. Today was David's turn to pay, and unusually, he suggested a slightly upscale restaurant. We arrived at the restaurant in David's car and were seated at a somewhat secluded table. It appeared he had made a reservation, which was rare. As we settled in, David suddenly became nervous and straightened up. Jessica, these past 2 months. I've looked forward to every weekend I could spend with you. I've started to wish I could see you every day. If you're okay with it, would you marry me? It was an unexpected proposal. Overjoyed, I momentarily pushed my earlier suspicions to the back of my mind. Thank you. I'd be honored. And so, we got engaged. Naturally, this meant leaving the matchmaking agency as we moved towards marriage. The following week, we went to look at rings together. It was just window shopping for now, but I remember feeling quite excited. On our way back, as we rode in the car, we discussed our future. We also need to decide on a date to meet each other's parents. It's going to be busy. I stretched with a and David agreed. I was in the passenger seat, and David was driving. I had gotten quite used to this arrangement. I was still carefree at the time. despite the growing excitement and anxiety about the future. I believed we could support each other through it all. Jessica, you're so busy with work, it must be really hard for you. I've always admired how dedicated you are. I want to be a husband who can support you in that regard. If you're okay with it, I wouldn't mind being a stay-at-home husband. David spoke happily about the future. His cheerful profile looked so cute. When he joked about becoming a stay-at-home husband, I couldn't help but giggle. I'm planning to quit my job after we get married, but we'll be okay, financially. When I said this, David turned to me with a surprised look. After that, he became quiet. Usually, he would insist on spending more time together, but today, he headed home early. I found David's behavior strange, but hadn't yet realized what was happening. After that, David changed dramatically. He kept making excuses about being busy or not feeling well whenever I suggested meeting up. Hey, we're getting married, right? I want to start planning our schedule and we haven't even made our family introductions yet. What's really going on? Did something happen? I pressed him over the phone, but David remained evasive. Even when we did manage to meet, he seemed distracted. Just when I was getting seriously worried, the situation took a drastic turn. Suddenly, David broke up with me. I can't see myself marrying you anymore. I'm sorry. Please let's break up. This happened at a cafe he had called me to. A cost-effective place we often went to when it was his turn to pay. I was shocked. We were already engaged and close to marriage, and yet he was ending things like this. Why? You were the one who proposed. So why are you suddenly changing your mind? What's the reason? Tell me. I repeatedly asked for a reason, but David only apologized. His mind seemed made up about not wanting to marry me. Unable to hold back any longer, I burst into tears. David left with a few brief words of goodbye. I couldn't let go and grabbed his arm. Wait, please wait. Why? Just give me a reason. David shook me off as if I were a nuisance. I was stunned. I couldn't believe the gentle, courteous man I knew could act so violently. Tears streamed down my face as David coldly said, "Shut up, I'm marrying someone else." Give it up, old lady. I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath me. This must be what despair feels like. Left alone in the cafe until it nearly closed. It was a painful task to inform family and friends of the broken engagement over the following days. Knowing how excited I had been about the engagement and proposal, my family and friends were angrier than I was. As for me, I felt drained, almost numb. I couldn't muster the energy to do anything or even speak ill of David. I'm probably never getting married. I guess it just wasn't meant for me. That's what I told everyone around me. I was deeply hurt. It took me well over a year to start recovering. And I decided to stop thinking about marriage altogether. 2.5 years after the engagement was unilaterally called off. The pain of being abandoned by David had faded. And I found myself feeling more angry and disgusted than anything else. And then, unexpectedly, I ran into David again. That day, I was at a charity event organized by a local nonprofit organization. Originally, it was my father who was supposed to attend this event. But he caught a cold and even developed a fever, so we decided it was best for him to stay home. The venue was filled with people of all ages and walks of life. I was there to greet people on behalf of my father, and while making my rounds, a couple caught my eye, making me catch my breath. The man was unmistakably David, the one who had left me. He was cozily snuggled up with a considerably younger woman. She was obviously much younger than David. I remembered how he used to say he preferred older women. Seeing him laughing joyfully, his arm around the waist of the young woman beside him, I felt a surge of indignation. Our eyes met for a moment. Displeased, I moved away to talk to someone else, but David came over to me alone. "Hey, long time no see. What are you doing here?" The face that once bore a refreshing smile was now twisted into an incredibly annoying grin. I felt truly disgusted and sighed. "Can you not talk to me? I'm busy." "Your tastes have really changed, haven't they? Weren't you into older women?" David then laughed as if he found it immensely amusing, coming even closer despite my grimacing face. As I tried to walk away, David whispered in a low voice, "I never really liked older women. I hated the idea of being with an old lady. I just thought it made sense because older women have money." I stopped dead in my tracks, remembering how David had referred to Old Ladies' Day during a phone call. It seemed that was indeed referring to the days he spent with me. I'm not particularly vain about wanting to look young. Nor do I mind being called an old lady under normal circumstances. But the way a old lady was used in disdain really angered me. I clenched my teeth in frustration. I'll do anything for a good life. That's why I married the daughter of a real estate agent. David walked away with a self-satisfied smirk. I once thought he was a decent person, but the current David seemed like a petty villain. If he could change his impression so drastically, perhaps he should have considered acting instead of hunting for a wealthy match. I'm set for life with a reverse dowry. Proudly tilting his chin, David flicked a business card held between his index and middle finger towards me. Every move he made felt pretentious, making me feel nauseous. Has the person I once considered marrying always been this unpleasant? Reluctantly, I accepted the business card. "Which real estate?" "Oh, that one." David had apparently taken his wife's surname, changing his own. The surname was familiar to me. Of course, the company name written next to it was as well. David's new surname was Johnson, and the company name was Johnson Real Estate. Without even checking his position, I handed the business card back. "Unfortunately, it looks like we'll be seeing each other monthly."
Ah.
What a shame. I was hoping I'd never have to see you again. Saying this, I handed over the business card my father had given me to David. He looked utterly confused for a moment. "Owen. Wait, does this mean you're related to?" he mumbled, his complexion changing. It seemed he finally realized my father and I shared the same surname. Even if he was slow to catch on, I explained it to him in detail so even he could understand. "That's my father. He couldn't make it today, but you're lucky. He probably wouldn't want to see you anyway. My family owns a significant amount of land. We're what you'd call major landowners, with assets possibly worth around $20 million. The reason I said I could quit my job after getting married is because we have enough passive income to live comfortably. The fact that I worked at a company was purely for my own sake. I enjoy working. So, after getting married, I plan to quit my day job and help with my father's land management business. In other words, by dumping me, David missed out on a far bigger, reverse dowry opportunity than he could have imagined. And while Johnson Real Estate is a decent company, compared to my family's assets, it's like comparing an elephant to a kitten. What? Seeing David speechless, I finally burst out laughing. I had planned to discuss my parents and our family wealth when we went to introduce ourselves formally. Thus, David knew about my job but was unaware that my parents were so wealthy. We've entrusted Johnson Real Estate with some of our properties. Lately, I've been handling land management and other transactions in place of my father. So, despite really not wanting to, I guess I'll have to see you monthly. David was shocked, not just because my family was wealthy. My family doesn't just own land, we also develop it, constructing apartments and buildings on it. One of our business partners is Johnson Real Estate. To us, they are just one of many familiar companies. And we could switch to another company if necessary. But to Johnson Real Estate, my family is an irreplaceable major landlord. Losing our business could indeed endanger their operation. Seeing David's ashen face, I suppressed my rising irritation, waiting for his response. Instead of the expected protest, David surprised me. So that's how it is. Wow, I'm so happy we'll continue to see each other. It must be fate that brings us together. Incredibly, David's attitude shifted as he began to ingratiate himself with me. His shamelessness was astounding, seemingly with a skin thickness of about 15 feet. Please stop. How can you talk about fate when you've been so despicable? It's disgusting. I made my rejection clear with a frown and attempted to leave, but David persistently followed. Wait, my princess. Our meeting like this must be fate, right? You liked me once, didn't you? It's not too late to go back to how things were. His comments were so offensive that I genuinely became angry. Especially since his persistence prevented me from greeting other important people. Deciding to escalate the situation, I loudly sought help. Help, please. I'm being followed. Can someone please get this man away from me? Peter Johnson, David's father-in-law and the president of Johnson Real Estate, hurried over in a panic. Seeing his son-in-law attracting attention as a stalker was naturally alarming. Since I had already greeted Mr. Johnson, he knew who I was. Step back, David. I deeply apologize. What exactly happened? Mr. Johnson scolded David and turned to me. Since I was asked, it was only natural that I told them everything. Is this man your son-in-law? He was my fiancé 2 years ago. He approached me after recognizing me here. After unilaterally breaking off our engagement to chase after a reverse dowry. He's now bothering me, wanting to reconcile upon learning about my family. I have no intention of associating with him, please take him back. David's wife, Mandy, also arrived. I had heard her name during my conversation with Mr. Johnson. Watching her reaction, Mandy said in a daze. He tried to cheat? Her shock was evident, but her response surprised me a bit. Perhaps she hadn't fully grasped the situation yet. I'm seriously inconvenienced. Please don't come near me. In front of everyone, I firmly told David off once more, frowning at any hint of his lingering attachment as I walked away. I hoped Mr. Johnson would ensure David and I wouldn't cross paths again. A few days later, a call came from my family home. A woman named Mandy, sobbing profusely, had come looking for me. Rushing home, I found, as expected, that the woman was David's wife, Mandy Johnson. After I left, she tried to confront David. However, David wouldn't listen and fled the venue, escaping both Mandy and his father-in-law, Mr. Johnson. Then, just yesterday, he returned home only to suddenly demand a divorce. He said he met his soulmate. Listening to Mandy's tearful story, I braced myself, hoping he hadn't claimed his soulmate was me. Mandy didn't know who this person was. Mandy had heard through the grapevine about how I had been suddenly abandoned in the past. And came to me in desperation, clutching at straws. I had no idea you were once engaged to David. I am so very sorry. Mandy apologized while crying. My friends and relatives were also at the charity event the other day. They might not know David's face, but they knew the story. Surely, someone had told Mandy. No, you're a victim of his just as much as I was. Please, don't apologize. I comforted Mandy. It was heartbreaking to see someone so much younger than myself in tears. Holding no resentment but feeling sorry for her. David's actions, which hurt an innocent woman, became even more unforgivable. Do you know where David is right now? This is terrible, unforgivable. I shrugged in response, genuinely having no idea. We pondered together for a while until a thought struck me. Given his recent behavior, David probably wanted to reconcile with me. Perhaps if I contacted him from my cell phone, he would jump at the chance. After he abruptly broke up with me, I was so furious that I had blocked his number. I quickly unblocked him, prepared, and then made the call. As expected, David immediately took the bait. Hello? Oh, thank goodness. Jessica, you've forgiven me. I wanted to scream at him to stop talking nonsense, but I had to restrain myself. Suppressing a sigh, I spoke up. Can we meet? I want to talk. It's at my family home. As soon as I mentioned a family home, David's voice lifted even higher, likely anticipating meeting my wealthy parents. Of course, my parents despise David so much they wouldn't want him in their sight. I love you, I'll come to pick you up right away. You were waiting for me after all, weren't you? We were just immature. But if you can forgive me, we can go back to how things were. We are destined lovers, after all. I pulled the phone away from my ear, disgusted by his self-deluded ramblings. Mandy, who couldn't hear the call, looked at me anxiously. I gave her a thumbs up to signal everything was going according to plan. Mandy, can you call your father right now? I whispered to her, and biting her lip, holding back tears, she nodded. I told David the place and time and then hung up. Now, it was time to set the stage. Unaware of the trap that had been set, David naively came to my family's home an hour later. I opened the door to find him practically dancing with joy. Jessica, I didn't keep you waiting. What? Stepping into the house, David froze in shock. Not surprisingly, he was greeted by a furiously angry Mr. Johnson and a weeping Mandy. David, how dare you betray Mandy like this? So it was all about the money from the start. Mr. Johnson scolded him, and David staggered back, pale as a ghost. But there was no escape. I blocked the exit. Waiting for you? In a way, yes, to settle things once and for all. And about the past? I can't just let it go. I'll be claiming compensation for your unilateral cancellation of our engagement. Hearing my declaration, David began to tremble. In his confusion, he stumbled further into the house, right towards Mr. Johnson and Mandy. This is terrible. You never loved me. I can't forgive you. We're getting a divorce. And I'll be claiming compensation too. Mandy, crying, threw her handkerchief at David. Mr. Johnson hugged his sobbing daughter, glaring daggers at David, who collapsed on the spot. One more chance. Jessica. Still not giving up, David appealed to me. If he thought there was even a millimeter of a chance, he was gravely mistaken. I declared with a voice as low as it could go, making myself clear. There's no way we're getting back together. I despise you. I never want to share the same room's air with you again. David was sweating profusely. It was too late for any regrets now. When Mandy's crying briefly paused, David let out a faint murmur. I should have just settled with the Johnsons. His whisper was small, but in the sudden silence, everyone heard it. I was shocked by his words, but Mr. Johnson reacted first. What did you just say? Enraged by the disrespectful comment, Mr. Johnson yelled at David, who practically jumped in fear. Pushed to his limit, David shoved past me and fled outside, tumbling as he ran. I could only stare after him, wondering how someone could end up so pitiful. Well then, shall we call the lawyer? Snapped back to reality by Mr. Johnson's voice. We quickly returned inside to retrieve our smartphones. We had recorded David's disgraceful actions. Of course, the initial phone call was also recorded. Right after David fled, we sprung into action. I'll certainly be claiming compensation for being unilaterally ditched. What about you, compensation and a divorce? Mr. Johnson and Mandy nodded at my question. That very day, we began consultations and prepared to legally corner David. First was my claim for compensation. Given the unilateral and outrageous nature of the breakup, it was undoubtedly granted. By the time we broke up, I was so fed up I didn't even have the energy to sue him. It had been 2.5 years since the engagement was broken off. Barely within the statute of limitations. David's blunder upon our reunion was a massive help. The Johnson family was also fully prepared. Moreover, David had left all his bank books and such at his in-laws' home before running away. So his financial situation was virtually an open book. After months of preparation and court proceedings, we emerged victorious. David tried to escape paying by claiming he had no means, but in the end, he was forced to cough up every last penny under his name. It seemed David was more inclined to spend than save. And even after liquidating his savings, it wasn't enough to cover the amounts owed to Mandy and me. Unwilling to pay more, David vanished. Disappearing from our hometown was inevitable. My family has been prominent landowners for generations, wielding significant influence. After such a confrontation, it was impossible for him to live here. But it wasn't just that, David literally disappeared. Even contacting his family yielded no clue to his whereabouts. Fearing retaliation from my family, they had cut ties from the start. Well, it's all in the past now. I'm relieved I don't have to see his face anymore. 2 years after our reunion, I recall David's presence just once. It was when I saw news of homeless people being evicted from a large park. A man resembling David flashed briefly on the TV screen's edge. I did a double take, but he disappeared too quickly to be sure. It could have been someone else. But if it really was David, it seemed a fitting end for someone who chased luxury at the expense of others' feelings. Several years have passed since then. Surprisingly, I am now married. Given my previous declaration against marriage, my parents and friends were shocked. My husband is none other than Peter Johnson, briefly David's father-in-law. Mr. Johnson and I had known each other through land development, but became close after teaming up against David. Jessica, if I could spend the rest of my life with you, it would be wonderful. Would you consider dating me? I remember how he shyly looked down before bowing deeply. Mr. Johnson was a single father, having lost his wife in an accident over a decade ago and had been single ever since. Our bond over this incident led to an unexpected connection, and things quickly progressed to marriage. Despite my previous distance from marriage, when it's time, things move fast. It's funny how unpredictable fate can be. I can entrust my father to you with peace of mind, said Mandy, now my stepdaughter. Initially, Mandy and I bonded over our shared hurt from David. However, as we grew closer, that past became irrelevant, and now I adore Mandy. Not just as a daughter, but as a dear friend. Being an only child, I had worried about managing my inheritance as I aged. That concern was partly why I ventured into matchmaking. But now I have Mandy. She may be a bit airhead, but she's a good kid. And I feel I can leave everything to her with confidence. Still, I hope she finds a reliable partner. Mandy is currently in search of love again, hoping for her second marriage. Alongside my wonderful husband, I'm hoping that this time, Mandy will find someone truly special.